Hello, welcome to US News and World Report. I'm Simon Owens, and here with me I have Heather Joseph. She's the director of SPARC, which stands for the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, Heather, President Obama, the previous week, he issued a landmark directive the other week on taxpayer-funded research. Can you talk a little bit about what that directive actually entailed?
Sure. The directive was actually ensuring that members of the public, for the first time, are guaranteed access to the results of research that their tax dollars fund. And it's in two parts. So guaranteed access to data resulting from scientific research and also scientific articles reporting on those results.
Mm-hmm. And we're not the first one to issue such a directive. In fact, the U.S., the NIH has already had a similar directive in place for a few years now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it seems like such a common sense principle. I think a lot of people are really surprised to find out that this wasn't something that the public was already guaranteed to have access to in the past. But actually, I think it's only been since the internet came along that we could really see ways that any federal agency that's funding science, that's collecting data, that has articles that are now posted online in scholarly journals, could really easily see making this available to anybody, in the American public anytime they want to get access to it. The NIH was a little bit ahead of the curve, and in 2008. They implemented a policy that basically said, if you agree to take money to do research from NIH on NIH issues of interest, biomedical science, biological science research, you agreed as a condition of that funding to make just articles reporting on the research openly accessible, and again, to make it openly accessible to the public online in an online database that's free to access and free to use.
Mm-hmm. And we're kind of late to the party on this, right? Compared to like Canada and the UK.
Well, the NIH was sort of early to the party. Canada was early to the party. The Canadian Institutes of Health Research has a policy that's very similar to the NIH's. Again, conditioning funding, saying it's part and parcel of the research process. Right? If you're doing research and you can't or you don't tell people what it was that you found out, the value of that research is obviously very limited. So I think the NIH, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the research councils in the United Kingdom in sort of the mid-2000s, around 2005, 2006, all were kind of looking at that principle and saying we need to act on it. All of those funding agencies did so, and they've been wonderful, wonderful test cases, I think, to really prove, well, could we make this work? Is it as simple as it actually sounded? I think the answer has been yes, and that's one of the reasons that we saw the directive from the White House last Friday.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I talked to the scholarly representatives of the scholarly publishing industry a few years ago, or a few months ago, I mean, they were definitely against the expansion of the NIH policy. What have you seen since this new directive was announced?
It's been really interesting. I mean, I should confess that I was a scholarly journal publisher for 15 years, so I fully understand the concerns that, well, if we're making these articles freely accessible through another source, wouldn't that naturally undercut the services and the value that publishers, journal publishers, bring to the picnic? But one thing's really important to understand about the NIH policy, the policies that are already in place around the world, and the policy that this presidential directive calls for, is that there are actually some safeguards in place to make sure that publishers are not unduly harmed. They do provide valuable services. So the main sort of safety net for the publishing industry is that these articles are not made available immediately on day one. They're not published in a journal and then the funding agencies get to make them accessible to the public. There's an embargo period built in. In the NIH, the case of the NIH policy and what the White House is calling for, it's a 12-month embargo period. So essentially publishers get a full year of exclusive distribution, and then the public's interest is balanced by being enabled access to these articles shortly thereafter. I think, in the instances of the CIHR in Canada and the research councils in UK, their biomedical policies, they have a shorter embargo period of 6 months built in. So, we could argue and often do about what's the most appropriate time, or if any embargo period is in fact the most appropriate. But I think the response from the publishers to the presidential directive has been sort of cautiously, this might be okay, because it follows the NIH policy's lead, and because they have not experienced any financial harm that they worried about in the time frame that the NIH policy's been in effect.
Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the initial pushes was for a 6-month embargo, and obviously this is a year. Do you think that's a little bit the Obama administration throwing them a bone?
Oh, I'm sure. I think it's all policy has some element of compromise in it, right? And I think that was the major place where the interests of the publishing industry were really sort of called out and said, let's, or at least let's start here. My hope is that over time, as you do proof of concept and the sky doesn't fall, that we'll look collectively together for shorter embargo periods to kind of bring that time frame as close to zero as possible.
Okay, Heather, those were all the questions I had. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
My pleasure.